I'm Pat Jenny. I'm president of the Salisbury Forum, and on behalf of the board, welcome all of you to Housatonic Valley Regional High School for this program with Mary Rasenberger. Our topic is artificial intelligence, or AI, and its impact on authors. All of us are aware of the threats that AI pose to anyone who writes for a living. By aggregating millions of written works into software, AI can generate new content. So how do authors protect their original words and get compensated? Certainly the screenwriters' strike by the Writers Guild this year was one of the first major labor battles over generative AI in the workplace. We are very happy to have Mary Rasenberger with us tonight to help us sort out this very complex topic. All of the Salisbury Forum programs are free to the public, as you know, and because they are free, we really rely on your support, and we're very grateful for all of your contributions. You can make donations in a number of ways by going to our website, salisburyforum.org, hit the donate button. You can go to Stripe for credit card payments or PayPal or our mailing address for a personal check. And if you like tonight, we have envelopes at the table if you want to give us a check this evening. Many of you have recently received either an email and or a letter from us as part of our 2023 fundraising campaign. As you know, our administrative costs are very low because we do not have staff. So your grant really goes to support the direct cost of bringing the speakers to you. Our final program this year will be on Friday, December 1st with Dr. James Shepard from the Yale School of Medicine and the Global Health Institute for Global Health, As an expert on infectious diseases and a local farmer who grows hops and raises livestock, Dr. Shepard will discuss with us how we can handle future pandemics. And on the drawing boards for the new year, on February 8th, we are planning a Zoom presentation with Bonnie Glazer in a return visit to the forum to discuss our relationship with China. Bonnie is the managing director of the Indo-Pacific program at GMF, formerly known as the German Marshall Fund, and a leading expert on China. So tonight, we welcome Mary Rasenberger, who joined the Authors Guild in 2014 as its CEO. With more than 13,000 members, the Authors Guild is the nation's oldest and largest professional organization for published writers and provides advocacy on issues of free expression and copyright protection. With the advent of text-based generative AI applications that can scrape the web for authors' content, Mary and the Authors Guild are pushing for legislation to protect authors' rights. Before joining the Guild, Mary Rasenberger practiced law for over 25 years in the areas of intellectual property, media, and technology, and she has special expertise in copyright law. She counseled publishing, media, entertainment, and internet technology companies, as well as authors and artists in all areas of copyright at the law firm Cowan, Debates, Abrahams, and Shepard. And from 2002 to 2008, Mary worked for the U.S. Copyright Office and the Library of Congress as the Senior Policy Advisor and Director of the National Digital Preservation Program. Mary is a frequent speaker and writer on copyright law and authors' rights. She's a lecturer at Columbia Law School and a graduate of Harvard Law School and Barnard College. So please join me in welcoming Mary Rasenberger.
And I want to thank the forum for inviting me here tonight and all of you for coming out on this beautiful Friday evening. Hearing the other speakers, I feel humbled in this to be your speaker tonight. Excuse me, and I'm getting over a cold. So hopefully you can hear me okay, and please bear with me if I cough. Apologize. So I'm here tonight to talk about the future of books in the age of AI, but I'm going to do it in kind of a roundabout way. First, I'm going to describe the kind of AI we're talking about, so we're all on the same page. Then I'm going to take a very, very short and superficial spin through the history of books past. Then I'm going to look at where the industry is today, and from there we will all try to figure out what's coming next. When I started thinking about the future, I have some ideas, but I realized it's because I know so much about how the industry is today. So first, let me explain what we mean by AI when it comes to books. And can everybody hear me okay? Okay, good. AI's been around a while. There are many kinds. At dinner with the high school kids tonight, people asked, well, what about Grammarly? Isn't that AI? Well, yes, but the kind of AI I'm focusing on is relatively new. It's called generative artificial intelligence. These are machine learning programs that are trained on a particular kind of creative work. So it could be text, images, music, software, and they generate works of the same nature, so text, images, music, or software. So I'm sure you're all familiar with ChatGPT and Bard for text, DALL-E for images, Stability for images, and there are many others, GitHub for software, and there are some for music. Generative AI models for text, you've probably heard the term, are called large language models, or LLMs. So you may hear me refer to them as LLMs tonight. To give you the lay of the land, the major English language LLMs right now are OpenAI's GPT, Google's Lambda, and Meta's Llama. Apple's looking to get into the space, as well as Amazon, which just invested $4 billion in Anthropic AI. And Microsoft bought 49% of OpenAI. I think they have a total of something like 13 billion in OpenAI already, and they have the exclusive rights to the source code. So these LLMs are referred to as foundational models, and applications or interfaces have to be built on top of them to make them accessible. So OpenAI's ChatGPT, Google's BERT, Microsoft's Bard, and Anthropic's new Claude, those are chat box interfaces built on top of LLMs. And so you think of the chatbots as a sort of gateway to the LLMs. All of the AI companies also provide APIs for other businesses and researchers to hook into the LLMs. And I'm telling you this because the API, for instance, for GPT has been around since around 2021. So before GPT, there were already about a dozen different applications that you could use available to the public. I think but you had to pay for, but that you could use to write. So Jasper was used for writing business copy, Pseudo-Write to help write novels. News articles, you probably heard, were being written with AI, and business copywriters were also losing work to AI pre-ChatGPT. But it wasn't until ChatGPT was released to the public last November 30th, not even a year ago, that people generally became aware of it and use just exploded. So GPT, of course, is the world leader. It currently runs 2 models, 3, 5, and 4. The free version of GPT is based on 3.5, just so you know, and then 4 is a newer model that came out in the spring, and that the paid version of ChatGPT uses 4, which is a much improved model. So let me just ask, how many of you here tonight have used ChatGPT? Okay, oh wow, so a lot, yeah. How many have used any kind of LLM or chatbot? Okay, yeah, good. So most of you are familiar with them. So one thing to know about ChatGPT, even the 4 version, is that you're not actually getting the full power of GPT. ChatGPT is heavily filtered and a toned down version of GPT. So for instance, you can't write that many pages with ChatGPT right now, but that's not a limitation, I understand, of GPT-4. So GPT is capable of much more now than we as members of the public see. One of the most important takeaways tonight is that GPT and all of the other LLMs are trained on hundreds of thousands of books and millions of copyrighted articles and websites. And this was all done without permission. Nobody was asked if it was okay to use their books. They just took them, and I should add, they took them from pirate websites, downloaded books from pirate ebook sites. And that is author's biggest complaint. It's like, well, you copied my book, you used it to train your AI, so it could spit out summaries of my book, and so you can, basically people can use it to replace me. So that's sort of one of the fundamental issues that we're dealing with right now. That said, LLMs, ChatGPT, they're pretty cool and they can be pretty useful to writers as well. But for now, I think the general feeling is until you get legitimate and start licensing works and paying for them, then a lot of writers just don't want to have anything to do with it right now. That's not universally true. But so these copyrighted works that they scrape from the internet are fed to algorithms, and the algorithms are taught from them to recognize patterns and relationships in language. And with that much text ingested, the LLM is able to write by predicting what word should follow what word. Okay, it's not like the way we write where we think it out and then write it down. We tend to think in sentences, or at least phrases. It literally writes word by word, and there are some people in the audience who might correct me on that, who know more about it than me. But what comes out, it does sound like natural human language. There's that, they call it the uncanny valley. It's not quite human, but it sure sounds human. And it's actually pretty cool. There are a few other things that I want to make sure you understand about LLMs for my talk this evening. The first is that LLMs, like all generative AI, are completely dependent on what they were trained on. The AI knows nothing other than what it has, quote unquote, read. And it has no independent relationship with reality. The programs are essentially like mathematical equations that spit out recombinations of what they've been trained on. In the industry, they say garbage in, garbage out, which means that if you want good outputs, what's generated, you need good inputs. And good inputs for LLMs, what they call data, but we like to call literature, are books, stories, articles, well-written blogs. So any good LLM today was trained on about 200,000 books or more and millions of news articles, as I said. And many, often the AI companies didn't scrape directly from the web. There are these third-party researchers that have created data sets, and they're publicly available. So the biggest one in use today is called Common Crawl. I think it's got 60 billion websites. It crawled, and it just took all of the data off of them, and all of the text, including if there were copyrighted books on in the website. So LLMs never really generate anything new. When a person creates a work of art or writes, they inevitably put something of themselves into it, some of their personality or soul, if you will. Not so with AI systems. That's the uncanny valley. There's no thinking, there's no creativity in how an AI machine generates any output. It's just going to take what it's been fed, and it kind of sort of paraphrases. So for now, GPT, it gives you really good bullet lists. It gives good outlines. I've used it for outlining. You can converse with it. It can generate a highly organized high school or college essay writing. And a lot of it's kind of eerily good. At dinner tonight with the high school kids, they were talking about some students who have used GPT to write their personal college essays. I can't imagine, they're very personal though, so they may not stand out in the crowd. I also just wanted to mention that OpenAI does have other versions that write better, apparently. There was a version of GPT-3 called Da Vinci, and it was allegedly pulled because it was scarily good, and it was also scarily weird and kind of depressed. There was a Washington Post article published in August there were 3 writers who tested Da Vinci by trying to get it to write poems, wrote thousands of poems, and they actually published a book of some of them. And they do report in this article being a little freaked out. And I'll just direct you to the article rather than read a poem, but they're definitely uncanny, and they're not so bad. I also want to sort of remind you that we have to bear in mind that we are in the infancy of artificial intelligence, generative AI. We're not even in the toddlerhood stage yet. So, for instance, GPT is not trustworthy on facts. I'm sure any of you have used it, have experienced that. If it has the information, it will give it to you. But if it's been fed bad information, it will give you that. And if it doesn't have the information ready at hand, it just makes it up. It's really good at that. So I tell people, do not rely on it for facts. I mean, it does have a lot of facts in it, and it can do really good outlines of historical stuff, but you gotta check it. So it is good at, as I said, at brainstorming. Also, some writers use it to help them brainstorm. They get writer's block. And I do think before long we are all going to use it. And in fact, almost all students apparently already are at the university level. Universities surveyed their students and found, and remember, these programs came out last winter. In the spring semester, almost 100% of students said they used it in some way or another. And when I asked the high school kids tonight, they said the same thing. They've all used it. And they also found, this was an anonymous survey, that they used it to write final exams and papers, just generate the whole thing. And the professors, they say they think they can tell, but they can't always tell, particularly with foreign students. And there are these AI detectors that don't really work that well now. Like they'll find a non-native English speaker's essay to be, they'll say it's AI generated. And one Fordham University actually tested all of the AI detectors and put the Gutenberg Bible through all of them, and not the King James Bible, sorry. And it said that it was AI generated. And that is because it's so common. So if anything's really common, it's going to think it's AI generated. But so based on the leaps of every version of GPT we've seen today, the next version, 5, is going to be that much better. Okay, it will be writing full books and doing a good job, I believe. And to give you a sense of the leap from one version to the next, is John Seabrook. He's a New Yorker writer. He wrote an article in 2019 called "Can a Machine Learn to Write?" He using GPT-2. So this is by GPT-3. It's pretty good at writing, full sentences. But 2, it had style down pat, had grammar down pat, but it wasn't so good at reality. So John fed it all these old New Yorker articles and put in the first paragraph of a 1950 profile of Hemingway, and said, please continue. And what he got back was, I walked up the path to the fence and saw a plump dog that had been a common visitor to the Finca Vigia before the war. Okay, so far so good. It says, the dog galloping up a path to the main building with a tiny cow of the same name standing by her side. I don't know how you gallop and have a cow standing by your side, but Then it goes on, there was a puddle of red gravy in the front yard. Possible, I guess. And Hemingway sat down on his lawn chair. So you can see that, GPT came so much further with 3 and 4. So I'm expecting 5 to be writing pretty good books. So let me now turn to the book, okay? What is a book? I would say it's an object, physical or digital, today, that is a record of long-form literary expression. And today with the audiobook, I don't think we can even limit it to written expression, which is most dictionary definitions will. So I'm going to focus on the concept of the author through book history and how it led to copyright law, because they go hand in hand with the development of book culture, and both, I believe, are at risk with AI. So before, I'm going way back in time, guys, so bear with me. And before the ancient Greek and Roman times, people who wrote and read were scribes. They wrote for others, kings, priests, and they saw themselves as just recording information. Taxes, religious stories, record historical facts. They did not consider themselves writers or authors. They wrote down information to preserve it or to convey it to someone at a distance. It wasn't their authorship. We do see the notion of a book as a way to communicate ideas and stories arise in ancient Greek and Roman times. We see the first ancient stories transcribed, and then we start seeing the development of many of the genres of Western literature. So in the earliest days of writing on papyrus scrolls, again, there were scribes who saw themselves as recording information for others. In ancient Greece, we start to have poets, philosophers, orators who recorded their drama, poetry, or thoughts in writing. But we don't see the notion of the author, or the word was auctor, until ancient Roman times. Auctor meant someone who was the originator of and had authority over the text. It is a derivation of the word auctoritas, meaning essentially a person of authority, someone who has influence and standing. So an author in this sense was the originator or founder, the creation of the text. It's the person who authorized the text and in a sense gave it a seal of approval to say this is truth. And I think that concept, if you think about it, is still with us today. So in the medieval period, particularly in the early medieval period, the monasteries, all writing sort of went to the monasteries, and the church takes over book production. And we lose again this notion of authorship. Monks copied text by hands, but they did it on behalf of the church or God. They did not consider themselves authors, but scribes, right? The word and notion of auctor comes back to use in France in the 12th century and eventually makes its way into English via the Normans and throughout Europe, I think in like the 14th century, the time of Chaucer. But it's not until the Gutenberg press that we see many new books being written as new books now, as original productions of an author. And you all know the story of how the Gutenberg press changed books and society profoundly. I'm going to talk a little bit about it because I do, and I'm not the first one to say this by any means, I do think with AI we're at a point of transformation similar to what the Gutenberg press brought us. So, the number of manuscript books in Europe before 1455, when the press was invented, could be counted in the thousands. By 1500, just 50 years later, there's more than 9 million copies of books. And the first books look kind of like manuscripts. If you've seen the Gutenberg Bible, they're very fancy, illuminated illustrations. But pretty soon, some disruptor realized, hey, we can create cheap books for the public. And we are in a similar age today. I think the way we think about the book is going to soon change. And I also think we're going to see an explosion in the number of books, but more on that in a bit. So despite Pope Alexander VI's best efforts in 1501, saying that he will excommunicate anyone who printed books without the church's permission, of course there soon were the books by Calvin and Luther. For instance, they questioned the church's authority, and eventually there were also books that questioned the absolute power of the monarchy. The authority of authorship, previously reserved for the church or state, now is given to writers and by extension to readers, the people. So you see where I'm going with this. I know this is very cursory and superficial, but we'll get to the role of the book in democracy. So very simplistically speaking, the mass production of books brought greater literacy, quickly led to the exchange of ideas, spread of information, that inevitably weakened the church and the monarchies, and eventually gave rise to the nation state, and the individual as having rights, and eventually democracy. Okay, those of you who are history teachers or English teachers probably would have a lot to say about what was wrong with that very superficial history, but the point that I want to just bring out sort of the role that authorship played. So now in England, book publishing actually remained controlled by the Crown, which had the power to censor books up until the 17th century. There was a guild called the Stationers' Company. It was given a royal charter in 1557. It was essentially a monopoly on printing. Nobody could print unless they were a member of the Stationers' Company. And the Stationers' Company, to be a member, you had to agree that you would only print the books that you had that were yours. You couldn't print anybody else's books. So it was kind of as an early form of copyright, but given to the printers. So printers would buy a manuscript outright from an author, usually for a measly sum, and if it did well, they got all the profit. Too bad, author. So authors were not always happy with this deal, and with the Enlightenment and the rise of the renowned playwrights and poets and philosophers in the 17th century, it occurred to some that the authors actually deserved the rights to the fruits of, to their own work as the fruits of their labor, was the term often used. So in 1710, we see the Statute of Anne, Queen Anne enacted it. It gave the exclusive right to authors instead of printers. And in reality, little changed at first because authors continued to sell their manuscript outright, but now in the form of copyright. But it was a big shift in thinking. Authors are now truly seen as the originators, the authorizers of their books, not the printers. And to this day, the author is still the brand of a book. It's not the publisher. How many people remember the publishers of all the books they're reading? So copyright law also allowed new models of payment to develop where authors could take some control and get additional money on the back end. Some writers were able to self-finance and self-publish. Some set up subscriptions. We're seeing these models return today, which is kind of cool. So we're in the 17th century, we saw a boom of great drama, Shakespeare, Marlowe, Moliere, they made their money from charging admission to performances, right? It's not until copyright law in the 18th century that we really see an explosion of literature. The beginning of literary culture as we know today. Reading started to become a popular pastime. Books are written for a broader audience. We see the rise of the novel, the newspaper business, and then in the 19th century, the emergence of the paperback and libraries, making literature available to even more people. So I'm going to quickly jump over to the US now. In the early 18th century, we were mostly reading texts from England, and universities still mainly taught Latin and Greek. We did not have our own literature in the US until the late 1700s. I would say because we had no copyright, but there were other factors. So in the late 1770s and 80s, the war's over. Everybody's talking about this new government that the Continental Congress is forming. We see a profusion of pamphlets and writing. People are starting to be more educated, and we start to see some early writers complain that they cannot afford to write because as soon as a book is published, all the other printers print it. So they start to lobby the colonies, and in 3 years, from 1783 to 1786, 12 of the 13 colonies enact copyright laws. Meanwhile, the founders are trying to figure out what this new government is going to look like, and some of them feel like there's this quandary. So they want the people to govern themselves. But some of them fear demagoguery would transpire if people were not educated. They realized that they needed a US-based writing and book culture if they were to have an informed people capable of governing themselves. Those are the words of James Madison. So they put copyright in the Constitution. Article 1, Clause 8, Section 8, Clause 8 gives power to the Congress to promote the progress of science and arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors, there's patents in there too, exclusive rights to their writings and discovery. And then based on that, there was the first Copyright Act was enacted in 1790 based on the Statute of Anne. So I am now going to skip over 200 years. I want to get through this talk. American publishing grew into the robust and diverse industry it became in the 20th century. You know, by mid-century, we had hundreds of imprints, were competing for authors' manuscripts. Books take a long time to write. You know, they often require juggling work with other work or taking time off. So if you're not independently wealthy, you need to be paid. Copyright allowed this to happen. And publishing became so profitable that by the late 20th century, outside ventures started buying imprints, publishers started buying each other. So today we're left with 5 big publishers, all owned by international conglomerates. They publish something like 60% of all American books, US books, and a lot of foreign books too, for that matter. So things are though still relatively stable until the early 2000s, when Amazon starts its online book business. Ebooks start to take off with Kindle in 2009, and you cannot underestimate the changes that Amazon has brought to the industry. First, it created a way to order hard copy books online, get them in a day. It changed the way we shop for books. You're no longer browsing in a bookstore, so discovery is limited to what you see on the screen. They also created the first successful ebook market, and they bought the dominant audiobook market, Audible. They still control 85% of ebook and audiobook sales today. And nobody's been able to put a dent in it yet, but Spotify's about to try with the audiobook market. So the biggest impact Amazon has had on books is to lower the value of books. So I'm trying to give you a sense of where we are before the beginning, before we have generative AI. It forced very steep discounts on publishers, and it sold books at a loss initially. But it also introduced a viable self-publishing market, one that has been growing and growing ever since. And the self-publishing market and Amazon's Kindle are really crucial for understanding where we're headed with books and AI. The Kindle book platform and the marketplace are now vast, and I think it's going to give us a peek of tomorrow's world of books. So all of the publishers worldwide publish about 500,000 books a year. On Kindle, just Kindle alone, there's well over 2 million. People self-publish for all kinds of reasons, but you know, there's some vanity publishing, but a lot of them aren't intended for a broad commercial audience. But there is a growing number of authors who self-publish because they make more money, a lot more money, self-publishing. And for now, they're mostly genre fiction, the romance, thrillers, mysteries. They are the highest growing area of book publishing by far today, from traditional publishers as well. Where traditional publishing profits were down last year, and they're pretty flat, barely up, I think like 0.6% this year. But the romance and other genres, like thrillers, are way up, like 16%. At the same time, full-time authors mean earnings are static from 2018, but self-published authors are earning more than ever, more than twice what they made 5 years ago. So we do a survey like every 5 years of authors' incomes, and we actually, the incomes went down 42% from 2009, the beginning of the ebook, the Kindle, to 2018, 42% down. Now they're stable. The median income for commercial, that is non-academic, traditionally published full-time authors from all their writing activities, and that includes speaking, journalism, teaching, editing, coaching, is around $25,000 a year. So that's the median. Only half of that is from their books. Full-time self-published authors who've been publishing at least 4 years, as it takes a while, to actually earn money from self-publishing. They're earning about the same now, a median of $24,000 compared to $13,000 in 2018. So that's a massive increase. And most of that comes from books. They don't have to do all that other work. And romance authors actually have a median book income of $32,000, so they're a little higher. Where you see a difference, though, is that the top end of traditionally published, the top 10% of incomes are much higher than self-published. So the potential to earn money is greater with traditionally published, to earn big money. But I want to put Kindle's vastness into perspective. So I think a lot of us, if we go to Amazon to buy a book or any online platform, we know what we want to buy. But if you're a genre reader, you read a lot. These are high volume readers generally, and you go and you look on Kindle for another book. Or you might get recommendations elsewhere, but there are so many genres on Kindle today, and they all have their own best-selling list. So under romance alone, there are 24 genres. Some of these have sub-genres, so there are things like, Gothic, of course, new adult, paranormal, rock star romance, and then there's some like historical romance where you can dig deeper into Victorian, medieval, or Regency. Into paranormal, you can go to werewolves, witches, vampires. It's very segmented. And then you can also search by type of romantic hero or theme. I mean, you might like alpha males, cowboys, firefighters, your pick, and you can also look by theme, romantic theme. Then there's this entire world of fan fiction that was spawned from the self-published books. And now they're also self-published serialization. So Shades of Grey, for instance, came out of fan fiction. And we've been involved in a couple of disputes between some of these writers. There are fan fiction writers gone in these sub-genres gone commercial. And the subgenres get so detailed with common tropes and characters and plots that it's hard to tell who's infringing who or if there is any infringement, because obviously the common tropes aren't protected. Okay, so anyway, this is where we are at the end of 2022 when ChatGPT is released. So traditional publishing is very consolidated, and only the biggest publishers tend to pay authors the kind of advance that allow them to take time off of work to write a book. Small publishers pay very little advance, if at all, and many are struggling. The Authors Guild has a legal services department. We have spent so much time in the last couple of years helping authors with small publishers that just stopped paying. They're going out of business. It's been really, really sad to see. Then we also see the immense rise of self-publishing and romance, genre spin-offs. Colleen Hoover, do you people here know who she is? Yeah. She for the last 2 years at least, she has like 2 to 6 books on the New York Times bestseller list. She's a phenomenon. She writes a kind of dark romance for young women, and she's really supporting SNS right now. At the same time, we see literary writers have to really cobble together a living with several part-time jobs. When you look at earnings by genre, they're, I'm sorry to say, at the bottom. So book publishers are still publishing many great books, the big publishers, but they have become more dependent on proven bestsellers. And you see this by the number of books by celebrities, of ghostwritten, and brand name authors. It's a little harder to break in. And if you do get a big publisher to buy your first book, and they are always looking for the next breakout author, and you might get a pretty good advance, but if that doesn't sell, you're done. You won't get a big advance on your second book. In the 20th century, your publisher stuck with you once you sign. They figured it might take 4 books for you to take off. Also, readership is down according to the NEA. Only half of Americans read a book a year, even just 1 book. A 2020 study shows that books also are vying for attention with gaming, video, TV, social media. Al Jazeera reported this summer that the typical social media user, which is 60% of us, spends 2.5 hours a day on social media. That is a lot of lost reading time. So now here we are, a year after GPT was released. We are seeing it being used to write books, replace blog and web copywriters, and even journalists are starting to get laid off. There is, on Kindle, there's a whole host of AI-generated books, children's, self-help. There's also this whole scam thing, though, where by and large, they're not very good books right now. They're just kind of whatever the AI machine spits out. But there was one week where AI-generated books had the top 40 spots of the top 100 in the young adult romance category. And so, of course, the real human authors who write in that category sold less. There's been a growth in unauthorized AI-generated summaries, and they place them right up next to the real book. They also figure out what the next big books are going to be, and before they come out, they generate a book on a similar topic, so people will buy that by mistake. One of our members, she's an author consultant, she found a bunch of books written under her name last month on subjects she's known for. We got them taken down, and Amazon has been taking a lot of these down. But, they have to be notified first. And then somebody wrote George Martin's Game of Thrones series. He's still trying to write those last 2 volumes. Somebody just went ahead and wrote them for him with AI, GPT, I think. So these kind of uses are taking money directly out of authors and publishers' hands. And so far these books are pretty low quality and they disappoint, but they're so cheap and fast to produce, even these cheap versions will flood the market. And as I said, the quality is going to improve very quickly. You've probably heard some writers like Stephen King say, I'm safe. AI is never going to be able to generate books of the quality that I write. And we agree, by the way. But it's important to remember that mass market commercial books, the highly commercial books, including genre fiction, self-help, and others that are more easily replaced by AI, they sustain the overall marketplace. They allow publishers to invest in literary books and nonfiction that don't sell as well. So everyone's going to be impacted because those markets will get flooded and publishers will earn less from those markets. I don't think literature is going to disappear. It's just going to be increasingly expensive and niche, maybe funded with philanthropy and not-for-profits, more like the opera today, which I love. So I think today in publishing, obviously we've been doing a lot of talking to publishers about AI, and they all strongly believe in the importance of human writing and great books. They're book lovers. But publishers need to show profit year after year and even growth. And I do worry that that's going to be hard to do in the future if you always favor human quality over potential sales, because there will be competition. There will be publishers out there willing to use AI. So our concern at the Authors Guild, is even those who say there's no way they're never going to use AI to write books, I do worry that if we don't have laws and contracts in place to prevent it, competitive pressures will force them to use AI for some books, or they might ask authors to start from something AI generated and pay a lot less for them. They may, in a way, ask authors to be editors. And that actually was one of the key things that the Writers Guild was fighting about in the strike. They wanted to get paid full credit. They wanted to get paid in full for a screenplay and get full credit, whether or not they used AI, and they didn't want to ever be forced to use AI. And they won on that for now. I also worry that eventually writers might feel the need to use AI to generate text to stay competitive and just be faster, particularly journalists. So another concern that authors have is that AI is very good at impersonating writer's voice and writing in any author style. Even not well-known authors, it really is able to capture style very well in a way that people are not that good at. It would take a writer a lot of training and talent to be able to do it, at which point, why would they do that? They would just write their own books. So, and to authors, it feels like identity theft. Pulitzer Prize winning author Min Jin Lee tweeted recently, or X'd, I guess you're not supposed to say. She said, AI companies stole my work, time, and creativity. They stole my stories. They stole part of me. That is a really common feeling. And the problem here that we have is that a writer's voice, a recognized style, is not recognized today as a legal home under copyright. And that's because it wasn't a thing before. It wasn't something people did a lot of. But now it's so easy to do. And it's what brand name authors are most afraid of, is that people will start writing their books for them using AI. I shouldn't say generating. So as of now, we can't really measure book authors' losses. They're not really measurable yet. They will be soon enough. But we are seeing freelance journalists and professional web and marketing writers losing work at an alarming rate. And short story magazines are flooded with AI-generated stories. A couple had to shut down submissions last spring. And this affects book authors, of course, because it's how many support themselves. One of our members reported losing 75% of her work because a client switched to AI. And another said, oh, listen, we'll pay you the same amount, but you've got to produce, they said, you just need to write 6 stories a month instead of 1, but just start with AI, and so it'll be much more efficient. And she was like, no, because then I have to correct the AI and put some voice into it. So a lot of people are losing work. So others are getting concerned about the potential, as Pat said at the beginning, of the potential of AI to decimate their profession. We surveyed authors last spring, and as early as last spring, 70% said they thought that generative AI threatened their careers. 90% said that they should be compensated if their work is used to train generative AI. And as you saw from the median writer incomes today, writers a lot of them are really living on the edge of being able to be writers. It's not going to take a lot of losses for them to just have to give up the profession. It's already pretty precarious before we're seeing the real impacts of AI. So to summarize, here's what I see with AI. The markets are flooded with AI-generated books. Not just scammers, but anybody who wants to write a book will use AI to generate it. It will democratize books, as some like to say, and that's kind of a wonderful thing. We can all be writers without training and talent, but we will drown in books. Books are going to become more sectorized, more personalized. Actually, GPT told me that. I was like, you're right, they're going to be more personalized. Imagine all the sub genres we're going to have. We're going to need AI to help us find the books we want to read. We will have a little shared reading culture, an extension of the social media mirroring we're seeing today already, where everyone has their own truth. So everyone's an author. No one has authority. The essence of the idea of authorship is gone, and so is shared truth. And I studied, critical theory and philosophy in college and grad school back in the 80s, and there's a lot about death of the author, death of truth, and it's like, yeah, it all sounded good and we could reiterate it, but now it's like in our faces. So I don't know what kind of society it's going to bring, and I want to hear from you guys. That's above my pay grade. I will say that in the meantime, the Authors Guild is trying to salvage what we can of copyright law and prevent AI from decimating the book world. So, of course, it's part of our mission to sustain and promote the profession of writing, but we do it because without professional writers, you're just not going to get many great books, particularly if they're written by AI. And we believe that books are hugely important to long-form thinking, to the exchange of ideas, to culture and democracy. The type of human-written books that professional writes, by the way, not hobbyists using AI, those are the books that lead us forward as a culture and society. It's exactly what the founders imagined when they included copyright in the Constitution. So, and actually, I just read this recently, though apparently these studies are not brand new, but using an MRI, they have shown that when a professional writer writes, a different part of the brain lights up. than when a non-professional writes. It's actually a different part of the brain. It's the same part of the brain that professional athletes use when they play, and that professional musicians use when they play. It's that expert part of the brain, the part that kicks in after you put in the 10,000 hours, as Malcolm Gladwell talked about in Outliers, not the Outliers. So my point is that the kind of writing that professional writers can do is qualitatively different. The problem is, in this new world, as books are more devalued, if they can't afford to write as a profession, guess what? They won't. And we will lose great books, and we will lose diversity. You know, there's a camp out there that sees authors and artists as, oh, just another profession of the past. So Chris Brigman is a copyright scholar who is actually leading the there's a project to do a restatement of copyright law, and that's when a judge has a case in a particular field, that's the first thing they'll pick up is a restatement. He recently tweeted, just a couple weeks ago, he said, "Whenever I hear an argument about how we have to find a way to compensate artists and writers for the competition they are going to face in the future from AI, I think of steel workers and telephone operators and travel agents, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, a zillion times over." So he's just like, too bad, authors are just gonna have to get retrained like everybody else. Well, what people like Chris miss is that we will not have the literature and arts we have today if we don't have professionals. I mean, it's gonna be a little bit like watching pickup basketball versus watching professional basketball players. So to keep the profession alive, and I'm wrapping up in 2 minutes, I just want to tell you a little bit about what we're doing at the Authors Guild. We're trying to tackle it from all sides. First, we don't believe that AI-generated material should be given copyright because nobody needs copyright incentives to use AI to quickly and cheaply generate, derivative type of material. We do not believe that AI companies should be able to use professional copyrighted works without a license. That is permission, payment. There's a term that's being used now, CCC. You need to give credit, compensation, and get consent. Also, AI-generated content should be marked as such so that people know what they're getting, so consumers aren't deceived. If they want to read AI-generated stuff, fine. But my guess is most people won't, other than for the novelty. And also, we want AI companies to disclose what the ingredients are, what copyrighted works they're using to train their AI, so that copyright owners can make sure they're licensed. And right now, we've been lobbying Congress very actively since March on legislation on all of these issues. We are starting to see some legislation come out. We are also, though, and this is a hard one that we haven't been able to convince anyone to pick up, is we need to create some kind of right that prevents others from stealing an author's recognizable style. This is a real issue for authors. And right now, you've only got a right if they steal a particular work, not if they steal the body of work. So that's an issue that we're going to continue to explore. Just want to mention that in June, we published a letter to AI companies telling them you've got to ask permission, you got to pay for authors' works before you use them to train AI. Over 16,000 authors have signed that letter to date. And we have been speaking to AI companies, trying to convince them to license. We were in active discussions with OpenAI, but we just felt like they were not going to compensate what we thought was necessary. So we did sue them in September. We organized a class action. I think we're the 4th class action lawsuit of authors against OpenAI, and there's some against Meta too. The support among authors has been overwhelming. Ours is, so the reason you have these lawsuits, you think, isn't that copyright infringement? But the fair use case law, fair use allows you to use a work without permission, has so expanded in the last 20 years, in part because of the tech sector that has, convinced courts that we need this broad fair use to enable technology to develop. And no judge wants to stand in the way of the advancement of technology. So we are in a world of such broad fair use that it's not a slam dunk that we're going to win these cases. Ours is very narrow because we want to set a precedent. We want to win. It's limited to fiction writers, not necessarily commercial fiction writers, but fiction writers who've actually been in the marketplace, and it's likely that their works were on pirate websites and were downloaded and used to train AI. We are also creating a licensing system where writers who want to make extra money and license their work for AI trainings can, and will get paid also on the back end if their work is used in outputs. We also want to, have conditions if authors don't want their works being used in outputs to prevent that. So I'm just going to ask you to wish us luck with all that. And I am not sure what kind of society the changes AI will bring to how we read and write in the future, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be different. And I'd love to hear from you guys about what you think. So on the floor.
Thank you for that. Is this working? Thank you for that wonderful talk, Mary. I would like to know what kind of compensation you can imagine from this scraping and using for training and then spitting out afterwards. How would the author be compensated for that?
That is such a good question, Roxana.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, yeah. So it's Roxana Robinson. She just asked the former president of the Authors Guild, so on her council. She asked, what kind of compensation do we envision for authors when their works are used to train AI? So we've been talking a lot about this, and it has to be enough to make it worthwhile for the author. Because we're talking about a willing seller, willing buyer kind of marketplace, okay? So it has to be interesting enough for authors and publishers to want to license. It's got to compensate them for any damages on the back end, but it can't be so much that AI companies will just be like, it's just impossible. So, and I went through who the big AI LLMs are by now, but you notice they're all major tech companies with a lot of money, and that's because it costs a lot of money to build the LLMs. But if you add up, if you multiply 200,000 by say $20,000, that ends up being like in the billions. It's at like 60 billion, something like, it's like a crazy amount of money. So what we're thinking about is that there's some payment, real payment on the front end. So that's just like extra money for authors. Somewhere 1,000, 5,000, I'm not quite sure. And Roxana, we're going to form a committee to figure that out. But that's why it's so important to also have compensation when your work is used. So when you license it, you can say, I don't want my work showing up in outputs at all. Like, you can use my work to help the AI learn how to read and write and use, properly, but nobody can put in a prompt saying, write in the style of, give me examples of this book or anything like that. And those can be blocked, and actually they know how to block them already. If, however, you choose to allow that, you need to get paid for that. And you need to get paid a more significant amount of money. So that's essentially what we're thinking about now, but a lot to be thought about. We're actually going to pull together agents and agencies and try to really think this through, and publishers.
You jumped so far ahead of my knowledge here. Let's say I'm sitting here and I want to write a book about Queequeg's adventures in the future, and I go to AI and I buy this AI. I pay somebody, right, to give me the AI, and I've got 4 or 5 choices that I can go to, sources, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I pay them something to help me write the book. Is that?
Well, okay, so.
How much does that cost? What I'm trying to drive at is, what does it cost me, the author, to create this book by AI, which I may tweak to make it better, supposedly. And then, once I have it done, then who do I take it to and how do I get compensated?
I can tell you exactly how to do this.
That's the economics of this.
Yeah. So first of all, the question is, how do I use AI? Who do I pay? How expensive it is to write a book? And then who do I take it to publish it? So right now, GPT 3.5 is free. I mean, I wouldn't use it to generate a book though, because 4 is so much better. GPT-4, a chat GPT-4, is it's $20 a month. Okay, it's not that much money. They make most of their money from licensing to companies that connect to their to GPT through an API. But also, if you've got enough people paying you $20 a month, that really adds up. So that's how they make their money. It's very affordable. Now, once you generate the book and you edit it and you're happy with it, it's really simple to just put it up on the Kindle platform on Amazon. They have this whole, system for self-publishing, they call it. Publishers use it too, small publishers. You can put anything up, and it's so easy. They're really good instructions. And then there are other platforms that allow you to do that, like Apple, Barnes & Noble has one, but Amazon's is the biggest by far. And all the best-selling self-published authors use Amazon to some extent. They also sell on the other platforms.
And then does Amazon pay me?
Yeah. So every time a book is sold, you'll get a percentage of that. Yeah, and that's for ebooks, and then you can also do it for print books too. Yeah, sorry?
You negotiated individually with Amazon?
No. Everything with Amazon is on a take it or leave it basis. Yeah, it's you click through agreements.
Hi there.
Hi.
So my question has to do with how you derive the connection with the source. So if I train my computer with Stephen King novels and Nero Wolfe novels, I'm going to get a certain type of style.
Mm-hmm.
And if I train them with more authors, a different type of style. And I don't understand how you're going to ascertain from the final product what I've been trained on. In other words, are you going to rely entirely on people's goodwill to figure out what you trained on?
Yeah,
and by the way, if you take this to its extreme, Stephen King read Hemingway. Does he owe Hemingway some money?
Yeah, so
What's the source of his knowledge?
Okay, so 2 questions in there is, how do you know what works were influenced what outputs? And 2, what about the fact that authors also, obviously they get trained by reading? Okay, so I'm gonna answer the second question first, because this question drives me crazy. Because it is a false equivalency. Okay, you're saying computers are reading like humans, they aren't. And they're not. When I say reading, the AI's reading, you might notice I'm using quotation marks. They're not reading, they're copying it, they're ingesting it. They don't learn like humans do. And it is a commercial use, and the scale is so different, so vastly different. You hear the AI companies making it all the time. But so how do you know what any output, what influenced it? Well, often you can just tell, okay? So, Dan Brown is a very supportive member, and I was talking about AI, and I just said, write me a story in the style of Dan Brown. It was so obviously Dan Brown, and that's why authors are so upset, because it's so obviously captures style. So one of our board members she's a Shakespeare scholar and a romance novelist, and she asked GPT to write like an opening of a certain kind of book in the style of 5 different authors, romance authors it's a historical genre, and then she also added her daughter's name, and it came back with each of their, just one paragraph that was so clearly in each of those authors' style. And then when they got to her daughter, they said, well, sorry, you're not aware of this author. The daughter's not an author. She was just trying to see what it would do. So it's obvious, for one. Two, there are some people in the audience who are working on this technology right now that actually tests for similarities. And there are also people working on technology that will actually trace input, so particularly book that's being used to train on, through to the outputs. So, that is to be seen, but it is possible to do that even today. And when we first started talking to Microsoft and OpenAI, they started saying, well, I don't know about paying you for the training, it's expensive, but maybe we're working on technology where we can figure out how to pay for actual uses. So I can't explain to you how that technology works. I just know it's being developed.
My experience with copywriting has been in photography, and I guess what I'm asking is, how do you create really a bite? Because, I had a photograph that was picked up by UBI, it was copyrighted. Did I get anything? Could I pursue that? No. And, people laughed at me. And now I've been writing, and something famous is very similar to something I wrote, and I'm with the Writers Guild, the authors thing, but how do you create a bite so you can actually pursue it and get something for it?
Yeah, so that's...
I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
And now you can't do that with copyright, at least with images. I had another painting stolen and by an advertising firm. Didn't get anything for it.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of piracy out there, pre-AI. The Authors Guild was very active in getting something called the Small Copyright Claims Board established, and that enables people like you, because the typical copyright litigation costs around $400,000. That was a few years ago. It's probably more now. Really expensive. Obviously, creators can't bring these litigations. So you can now file a claim in the Copyright Claims Board, but because of the constitutional requirement that people have the right to a jury, it has to be opt-in. So you can bring a claim there, but the person you're suing can just say, I don't want to be in this venue. However, it's been up and running for almost 2 years now, and there are a lot of cases being brought there because actually defendants want to save money too. And you can do it yourself. It's a do-it-yourself claims process, basically, like small claims. There's a limit on how much you can recover, though. So, okay, but also to answer, what are we doing? How are we doing it? So, the Writers Guild, the screenwriters, and they represent some other writers too, they're all employees, though. That is why they have the right to collectively bargain. That is why they have collective bargaining agreements. Authors, freelance journalists are considered independent contractors. They do not have the right to collectively bargain, clearly. So that's one thing we're fighting for, is for freelance creators to get collective bargaining rights. And then AI smacked us across the face last winter, and we haven't, we kind of put it on hold for now. But it's bringing us back to the same place, because the only way we're gonna make this happen is collectively. First of all, AI companies aren't going to go to every single author and say, hey, send them an email, can I license your rights? They're not going to do that. They're going to publishers. Publishers don't clearly have the rights, and they don't want to license for now, for the most part. That's starting to change. But they also know that they don't clearly have the rights, so they have to go back to the authors and get permission. And we want to make sure that authors ultimately have the say over whether their works are used for AI. But it is, so we're doing it through, we're trying to get legislation, as I said. We're talking to AI companies. We're trying to create this collective licensing system so that the AI companies can just come to our platform and say, okay, we essentially were putting together a training data set for them. Of course, that's, it's going to be a lot of work. Thank you.
I happen to be an author, but if I'm imagining myself as an AI firm, I would think, oh, well, it's obviously much cheaper and much less fraught to just use dead authors And it could be an author who died, 5 minutes ago, but at least they're not gonna bug me.
Well, that's true. Now, copyright though lasts life of the author plus 70. And they probably have, if when you die, your books are still making money, your heirs are gonna care about them. And they're gonna enforce your rights for you. But books that don't make a lot of money, no. The technology companies, this is something we fight all the time, they basically treat out-of-print books where the rights are reverted to the author as though they have no value, so they're free for the taking. And this is a big thing that we've been fighting this out too. Because obviously you can reprint your book, you can make money from it.
Hi, Mary. Thank you. Could you speak to what would happen? I mean, what you're doing is you're sort of at the tip of the spear for humankind as far as copyright and IP. What would happen if, in fact, the AI companies win on copyright law and they create a broad fair use that essentially says if a work is ingested for AI, which pretty much everything's going to be AI in the future, there is no such thing as copyright because all data and intellectual property is now available to AI for fair use. What does that world look like?
Well, I'm not even gonna believe that's gonna happen. I mean, we could lose the cases, but, we've been asking Congress for legislation that would clarify that this isn't fair use. Very hard thing to do. They don't like to mess with fair use. So basically what we've been told, though, is that the members of Congress who are interested in these issues, they're saying, well, we want to see what happens with the cases. We want to see if the courts do the right thing. If they don't, then let's talk. Congress understands that they need to protect professional creators. I mean, I've yet to talk to anyone in Congress who doesn't support that. But you know how hard it is to get any legislation passed, right? I mean, we have a broken Congress. Right now, they're still pretty much kind of more or less aligned on AI, but that will start to fracture very quickly, and already we're seeing some far right saying, oh, we don't need regulation. We have enough regulation. So I don't know. But let's not go there for now.
If I write a bestseller and I find out that 5 years from now there's a very similar book out there, and I read that book and I find out that there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of similarities, I've got a good case.
Yes.
If I read that book and there's only one or two similarities, at what point do I really think that I have a case? I mean, is it like 10% of the book? If it's 90%,
Yeah.
so is there like a governing line where
Yeah.
someone's crossing it?
So let me just repeat the question. It's like, if I find somebody's, published a book similar to mine down the road, it's got a lot of similarities. Like, at one point, does it become infringement or is it not infringement? And there's like, the one thing I love about copyright law is that there are no bright lines. It's a really fun area of law for that reason, because it's like, you have all these standards that are, you gotta really know case law to really understand it, and you never really know the answer. So there's this thing called substantial similarity in copyright law. And so the second work has to be substantially similar to the first to be infringing. And the way that's defined is that an ordinary person looking at it would think there are more similarities than differences, would think that it's copyright. It's an ordinary person test. And these questions, a lot of copyright cases are decided on summary judgment by courts, but a lot of them go to juries. And juries are presented with this and this ordinary person test. So there's no 50% or whatever. But if something, And that's why, particularly these cases in the sub-genres, where before you do that comparison, you have to filter out everything commonplace, everything that's not protected. And then you look at the protected expression of the original, and you compare the allegedly infringing work to it, and for substantial similarity. So, I mean, that's the best I can tell you. Obviously, 90%, yeah. 50%, probably. 10%, I'd say probably not. Yeah, right in front.
Hi, Mary, thank you. So if someone, I don't know, say if one were to, use AI to generate something, I don't know, a snappy Christmas carol that about a subject that, the dancing Christmas tree, or some children's story about the blue goat that eats flowers, or whatever, things that don't necessarily exist, but that could be generated, and then publishes or produces those things, who owns them?
No one. And we want to keep it that way. So there's no copyright in something that's completely AI generated. Now, the fact is, the way most people use AI today, artists or writers, is that there's a combination. You use AI as a tool, so there could be some AI generated content and some human. And the Copyright Office has guidelines on this, and actually there's a big notice and inquiry that we're all responding to on Monday that will include these questions. It's like, where do you draw the line? And so far the Copyright Office saying, and I agree with them, so to the extent a combination work it's easier for text. If there's clearly paragraphs, sentences that are AI generated, you disclaim those when you register. You don't get protection in those, but you get protection in the rest, and you get protection in the whole as long as the term is appreciable human content, human creation. You will get a copyright, but it doesn't cover any of the AI generated stuff. It's a little more complicated with images because you have one image, and it's hard to see, what was the human generated and what was the AI generated. It's a little harder to distill. And that's where there's a lot of conversation around that right now. But it's good not to have copyright ownership because we don't want people making money from purely AI generated content, because then copyright is lost. It's just, the markets will get so flooded, and how do you incentivize human creation in that kind of marketplace where everything is so devalued because there's just so much of it? And people get used to, low quality content. Look at Hollywood,
So that kind of tees up my question here. There's so much to think about. I'm a librarian at one of the local private schools.
Thank you.
And I went to law school somewhere along the way, so fascinating. Can you talk a little more about the future that you've laid out, in which there is this enormous proliferation of what we think of as the kind of human scale book, and how that might affect the relationship between human authors and however the publishing field evolves, how that might cause those two, I'm speaking on behalf of readers, how that might, not so much authors, how that might cause some more symbiotic feeling between them and less antagonism between the publishers trying to help the reading public find quality content. Does that make sense?
So the question is the antagonism between who and who?
I have a sense of antagonism and conflicting purpose, or there's lots of symbiotic relationship between authors and publishers. But since the rise of ebooks and audiobooks and Amazon and all the influences you talked about, real disputes, fundamental disputes, and the narrowing down to the big five between those who want to value human content and those who are gatekeeping the human content. But now I'm beginning to feel as if those two forces might be aligned against the non-human content in ways that are productive from a valuing the highest quality.
Yes, so absolutely. So publishers and authors right now are very aligned on AI. And we're lucky in our industry because, for instance, in the motion picture industry, you know, the screenwriters really had to fight hard. The motion picture industry wants to use AI. They're not being shy about that. In publishing, I talked to the CEOs of the big publishing companies, and none of them say they want to use AI. They're all like, are saying, absolutely we value human content over human creation, because they're all book lovers. But we actually work very closely with we're on contract stuff, we're always fighting them because they take too much. But on copyright, we work hand in hand with them. We are working very closely with them on book banning right now. We've got a bunch of litigations that we brought in some of the southern states. And we try to get other state legislation knocked out before it even gets passed. So we work very closely with them on other issues. And I would say by and large, our interests are pretty aligned. It's just when it comes to contracts. Okay, thank you everybody. This has been really fun.